Paris, the city of lights, the city of love. It's easy to forget that this world-renowned metropolis was once a small village. And yet, that village played a critical role in shaping not just France, but all of Europe. This is the first part of our history of Paris. Although the area around Paris has been inhabited by humans for nearly 10,000 years, the settlement that would become the capital of France owes its name and origins to the Gallic tribe known as the Parisi. They settled along the banks of the Seine between 250 and 225 BC. They called their settlement Lucca. But that's not the name that stuck. Instead, the Parisi are remembered for the fort and bridges they built, which ensured control over vital trade routes and made the town prosperous enough to mint its own gold coins. But this wealth attracted the expanding Roman Republic. In 52 BC, the Roman army reached the gates of Lutetia. The Parisi and other Gallic tribes were defeated in the Battle of Lutetia, and the Romans wasted no time in establishing their dominance. They built a new settlement named Lutetia Parisiorum, or Paris to the Parisians, on the left bank of the Seine and laid it out in Roman fashion. Centered on a forum surrounded by government buildings, shops and temples. Across the river from the settlement, they constructed a great amphitheater in the 1st century AD that could seat 15,000 spectators. An extravagant addition for such a small city. Over the next 2 centuries, Lutetia grew considerably, but it never became a sprawling metropolis. By the end of the 3rd century, it was still a relatively modest city with a population of around 40,000. That's why the construction of a large church in the 4th century, dedicated to Saint Denis, who had been executed for refusing to renounce his faith, was such a pivotal moment for the city. The hill where he was put to death became known as Montmartre, and the church on top of it remained a place of pilgrimage for centuries. But by the late 3rd century, raids by barbarian tribes forced residents to flee to the island of La for safety. They used stones from abandoned monuments to build the first city wall, and the name Lutetia gave way to Civitas Parisiorum. Within a century, it was simply Paris. In the 5th century, the fall of the Roman Empire brought hardship. Attacks by Huns and Franks threatened the city. Legend has it that Saint Genevieve, a woman of humble origins, led its defense. She became the patron saint of Paris after successfully warding off the invaders. By the end of the 5th century, however, the Franks controlled northern Gaul, and Clovis I made Paris the capital of his kingdom. But under the Carolingians, Paris lost influence to other cities like Tours, and in the 9th century, Vikings attacked Paris by sailing up the Seine. They were repelled in 885, an event that proved the city's strategic importance. Over the next 2 centuries, new walls were built on the right bank, and by the 13th century, both banks were fortified. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comment. Let's move further. Last time we talked about how Paris went from a small village on the river Seine to a medieval metropolis. Now let's see how it grew from a medieval city to a modern metropolis. So at the turn of the 12th century, the Capetian dynasty made Paris the cultural and political heart of France. The royal palace was on the Isle de la, or City Island, which gave way to the Palais de Justice, or Palace of Justice, in the 14th century. Meanwhile, the left bank became a religious and learning hub, home to great abbeys like the Sorbonne and Cluny, and the University of Paris, founded in 1150. And the right bank thrived as a center of trade and commerce. King Philip II, who reigned from 1180 to 1223, paved the streets, built the Louvre fortress, and walled the city in 1213. Around 1160, Bishop Maurice de Sully began the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral, which took 2 centuries to finish. It would set a new standard for Gothic architecture for centuries to come. And in 1248, Louis IX built Sainte-Chapelle, a jewel of stained glass. By the 14th century, Paris had 200,000 people, the largest city in Europe. But don't be fooled by the big numbers. Most Parisians were poor. Life was hard and short. The Black Death killed 50,000 Parisians in 1348. The 100 Years' War between England and France also devastated the city. Between 1420 and 1436, Paris was occupied by the English. After the English left, it took decades for the city to recover. Still, by 1500, Paris reached 250,000 people. In the 16th century, King Francis I ushered in the Renaissance to Paris. He built new bridges and fountains and the Hôtel de Ville, or City Hall, and Paris became a hub of printing and learning. But in 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre killed 3,000 Protestants in Paris. For the next 20 years, the city suffered through religious wars. But in 1598, Henry IV issued the Edict of Nantes, granting religious freedom. He then rebuilt Paris with new squares and bridges. But he was assassinated in 1610. His successors continued to expand cultural life with palaces, academies and churches. But after rebellions against royal authority in 1648 and 1653, Louis XIV came to distrust Paris and moved his court to Versailles in 1671. Still, Paris grew to 500,000 people by the 18th century, and during this time, Enlightenment ideas flourished in its cafes. But inequality and high taxes fueled discontent. So, when the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Paris was ready to burn. In 1793, King Louis XVI was executed. Then, in 1799, Napoleon seized power and turned Paris into an imperial capital fit for a new empire. He built monuments like the Arc de Triomphe. But after Napoleon's fall in 1814, Paris faced unrest, revolutions, and 3 new monarchs. Finally, in 1852, Napoleon III launched Haussmann's grand urban renewal. Baron Georges Eugene Haussmann designed wide boulevards, parks, and uniform buildings. And by the 20th century, Paris became a global hub of finance and culture. Today, over 11 million people live in the Greater Paris area. Ah, Paris! Can you believe that this magnificent place has been around for over 2,000 years? I made a 2-part series about the city's origins and how it grew to become the metropolis we know today. And now it's time to take a look at the last 150 years or so. So buckle up, grab a croissant, and get ready for more tales from the City of Lights. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War brought siege and starvation. The Prussians surrounded the city and cut off food and water, with only a few weeks' supply remaining. The Parisians rose up and stormed the Tuileries Palace, forcing the royal family to flee. But with no food and the Prussians still outside the gates, what was to be done? Enter the Paris Commune, a provisional government that seized power in the city. They negotiated a peace with the Germans, much to the fury of French nationalists. When the armistice was signed, the Germans pulled out of Paris, but they left behind a bitter pill. France had lost Alsace and Lorraine. To make matters worse, the vengeful National Assembly crushed the Paris Commune, executing or imprisoning many of its members. This dark period ended with the Belle Epoque, a glorious age of department stores, expositions, and cultural events. It was during the Belle Epoque that Paris became the epicenter of modern art and culture. The great masters painted the city, including Monet's famous series of haystacks and water lilies. Writers like Victor Hugo and artists like Toulouse-Lautrec captured the city's beauty and its people. The crowning jewel of the Belle Epoque was the 1889 exposition, which showcased the latest innovations, including the Eiffel Tower, built as the entrance arch to the exposition. Gustave Eiffel, the man behind the tower, predicted that in 20 years it would be torn down. But Parisians fell in love with the structure, and it became a permanent fixture. The exposition also featured a state-of-the-art metro system, the first of its kind in the world. Paris was becoming a modern city for the modern age. But disaster struck in 1914 when World War I broke out. The Germans advanced on Paris, but after heavy fighting, they were forced to retreat. The war was far from over, but Paris had proven that it could hold firm under fire. After the war, the 1920s brought a cultural renaissance, with writers like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, artists like Picasso and Utrillo, and musicians like Satchmo and Django. The legendary jazz singer Josephine Baker dazzled audiences at the club Le Boeuf sur le Toit. But the good times didn't last. World War II was even more devastating than the last. On June 14, 1940, France fell to the Germans and Paris was occupied. Over the next 4 years, the Germans deported 75,000 Jews from France, most of them from Paris. Many of them ended up in concentration camps. Meanwhile, the rest of Paris suffered under German occupation. But resistance groups plotted the city's liberation. In August 1944, American troops arrived and the city was finally free. After the war, Paris experienced a wave of immigration from its colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The newcomers helped rebuild the city and its economy. By the 1980s, Paris had regained much of its prestige as a global capital of art, fashion, and culture. The Louvre Museum was expanded, the Pompidou Center opened, and the city hosted the 1988 Universal Exposition. Of course, this is just a tiny part of Paris's long and complex history. From the days of Julius Caesar to the present day, the city has seen its share of plague, revolution, and war. But through it all, Paris has always risen again. It stands today as one of the most beautiful and captivating cities in the world. I hope you enjoyed this whirlwind tour of Paris history. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more historical tales. Until next time, au revoir.